What's good? It's your boy Fanon. All right, man, I'm going to do another video close to the video of the last subject of the last video I did because Bob Arum also talked about Spence versus Crawford. I did another video about the potential unification fight between Vasily Lomachenko and Mikey Garcia. And so now I'm also going to talk about, actually, that would not just be unification. That would be for the Undisputed Championship and to name the champion at 135 pounds. Also, you have to talk about Spence versus Crawford. And Arum saying that they're ready whenever Errol Spence is. He makes fun of Errol Spence and calls him a genius, which means, basically calling him an idiot. For saying that he's on the other side of the street and that, obviously Errol Spence doesn't want to fight, Crawford wants to fight, all of that, right? And I'll get into the specifics of it. But I want to be real clear here, man, that my desire to see the all fights that are happening at 147 pounds, in my opinion, and this is an opinion channel, man. I'm not one of these cats that think that my opinion is fact. It's an opinion. There's a lot of things there are a lot of subjective things in boxing. And one of them is, what the heck do you think a champion is? Obviously, because there's no objective. There's a bunch of title holders. There's no champion. And when you have four guys holding belts at a division, to me, it does not matter which one of them fight each other. So in the case of Mikey Garcia and Vasily Lomachenko, if Vasily Lomachenko beats Jose Pedraza, then there will be two champions in the lightweight division, which means that if the only fight that would matter in the lightweight division is Vasily Lomachenko versus Mikey Garcia, in my reasoning, right, the way that I see it, and it wouldn't be because it's a huge fight and it makes a bunch of money for people. It would be because that decides who the champion is. Now, as far as the other obvious example of that is Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. The only fight that should have been happening in the heavyweight division that mattered was Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, not Alexander Povetkin, Anthony Joshua. Unfortunately, we also have a lineal champion in Tyson Fury, so that makes a more acceptable fight between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, because at least you can quash the question about who the lineal champion is. Because I think it could be, I personally thought it was Deontay Wilder, the way that I looked at how the heavyweight championship belts got passed around. More people believe the predominant view is that it was Tyson Fury that's the lineal champion. But at the end of this fight, we'll come to a conclusion. Now, here I want to defend something that Errol Spence Jr. said, because I agreed with him. Because there are several fights that Errol Spence can take that are valuable, that head towards him being the welterweight champion of the world. That because there are four champions, not like in the lightweight division. After Jose Pedraza gets beat by Vasily Lomachenko, there'll be two. At heavyweight, there are two. Here, we're in a situation in the welterweight division where there are four. And if you listen to some morons, there might be five. If they considered, according to the record, that they tried to give Gennady Golovkin for 20 title defenses. So shoot, Manny Pacquiao must be the WBA regular champion. But aside from the obvious that he's not the champion, the WBA champion that Keith Thurman is, you have Errol Spence Jr., Sean Porter, Keith Thurman, Terrence Crawford. And when Errol Spence Jr. said, I'm trying to fight Keith Thurman, I'm trying to fight I'm trying to fight Sean Porter, that is him trying to unify belts. He's not asking for a fight against somebody that does not hold a title. So if he says, I'm going to focus on what my plan is and has been for a while now, there's nothing wrong with that. He's not avoiding anybody. He is not participating. His approach to boxing and what he says is not part of the problem. The problem is exemplified where you see guys like Mikey Garcia, who's one fight away from unification, and from being undisputed, from being the champion, deciding that he's going to skip around weight classes for his own anger, so that he can be the first guy to get some who gives a damn record of being the first guy to win 3 titles in 3 weight divisions in 11 months, who was left-handed, has black hair, and whose father coached world champions. I mean, who is the lightweight champion? That question can be answered with a fight between either Mikey Garcia and Lomachenko, or Mikey Garcia and Jose Pedraza. But either way, you cut it. Mikey Garcia is 1 fight away from that. That fight, that partnership between Showtime and ESPN should be made, because you know that that's going to be the case in December. One of the 2 guys are going to be a unified champion. It's either going to be Vasyl Lomachenko, or it's going to be Jose Pedraza, are going to hold the WBO and the WBA championship belts. But that's not the case with a fight between Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. If Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. fight, then Terrence Crawford becomes and Errol Spence Jr. wins. Errol becomes the WBO and the WBC champion. I mean, an IBF champion, WBO and IBF champion. And then you still have 2 more fights to make before there's unification. So I just wanted to be clear that the Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence doesn't have to happen next. It would be a great fight to be seen, because those are the people that people believe are the top welterweights. But honestly, man, there's a dude named Keith Thurman, who, despite the fact that he might have looked like he didn't want to fight Errol Spence, and he was bull crapping about Errol Spence, he still really should be. If he was active and had defended his belts, he still might have been the WBC and WBA champion. And quiet as kept, he might wind up being the WBC and WBA champion if Sean Porter doesn't fight Errol Spence Jr. So I'm like, I saw a video by somebody that said, look, man, it's like when I said that these guys need to step up. I'm telling you, there's 2 fighters that I don't believe that they're in their mentality that they've already shown that they're willing to step up. Errol Spence Jr. went over to the UK to fight probably might have been the best welterweight at the time in Kell Brook, and beat him overseas and came back and has been trying to make these fights, man. So I'm not criticizing Errol Spence for what he's doing right now. And honestly, when he said, look, those guys are on the other side of the street, I'm trying to clean up my side of the street, the way that is applied, honestly, man, it doesn't sound good. Like, if I was consulting him, I wouldn't have said, oh, man, don't say it that way. Say it this way, right? Don't say it that way. Say it this way. Don't say, I don't care about, Terrence Crawford. He's on the other side of the seat. On the other side, I'm not going over there to fight on ESPN. And unless they're trying to work something out, then, hey, man, we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But I don't have a short memory, because this is what he said. I don't have a short memory. Keith Thurman, before everybody was like Keith Thurman, he still wants his fight with Keith Thurman. And he should want his fight with Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman is the WBA champion. And he's pushing to get a fight with Sean Porter. There's nothing wrong with that. That's nothing. And for him not to prioritize a big money fight, honestly, if they said, okay, it's going to be pay-per-view. Another part of that, like if you listen to what Bob Arum says, right? Bob Arum says, eventually we think we're going to be able to make a Spence fight because the money will be so big and will be reasonable and we'll share things and everything. Right. Eventually, we'll be able to make a Spence fight. Now, in one side, he's talking about how he wants to make the fight. Right. Like they're ready now. But then later on in the sentence, he says, eventually, I think I'll be able to make a Spence fight because the money will be so big and will be reasonable. You'll be reasonable. If he gets his hands on those 3 belts, you don't need to be reasonable. You need to do what he says and make that fight. Bob, when Errol Spence Jr. said that he was the A side on that fight, he's the A side, not Terrence Crawford. He very well might be. That very well might be the case. It very well might be the case, especially if he beats Sean Porter and he fights Keith Thurman. And it might not be a matter of you guys being reasonable. It might be a situation where he's reasonable. Also, there's another thing about this. Errol Spence Jr. He's had his belt last less than a year. And and eventually he's going to get this fight with Sean Porter. He's going to get that WBC belt. He's going to get that fight with Keith Thurman. And then, if it winds up being that, now the question for me then is, okay, is Terrence Crawford going to try to fight Sean Porter? Is Terrence Crawford trying to fight Errol Spence? And I have no doubt that he would try to do that. Now, when I got on Terrence Crawford, the only beef that I had with Terrence Crawford is that Terrence Crawford signing with Top Rank brings Bob Arum into the equation. And even though Bob Arum might very well, if you take Bob Arum at his word, which is really never anything bright to do, it's not very bright to do, but if you do, right, at the very least, you still know you have to deal with Bob Arum. You have to deal with whether he's going to be reasonable or not be reasonable. But look, when I'm getting on these, and I don't think it is fair to get on Errol Spence Jr. about the fact that there's not already a unified champion, at least, somebody that has the WBA, WBC, and the IBF, because that fight could have been made with Keith Thurman. All you had to, it was just two guys. It was Keith Thurman and Errol Spence Jr. And if Keith Thurman was able to hold on to his belt and unify with him, we could already had it. But if ands and buts were candy and nuts, whatever's clever. But still, man, I definitely want to say that, because I've been getting on people about these young fighters need to step up, and somebody has to gain complete control of that welterweight division so that they can pop out of the top as far as being a superstar in the sport, and we can move on into a different area of boxing. But I want to be real clear. I am not criticizing Errol Spence Jr. I don't think Errol Spence Jr. or Deontay Wilder are part of that problem. I think those are two guys that are actually actively trying to push to make that happen for themselves. You know what I mean? And for Errol Spence, it doesn't really matter if he fights Terrence Crawford next, or because he's got two other guys that he could fight. Same thing could be said for Terrence Crawford. It doesn't matter if Terrence Crawford fights Errol Spence next. If Terrence Crawford could get his hands on Keith Thurman, or if Terrence Crawford could get his hands on Sean Porter, I take those fights too. Just like I was cool with Anthony Joshua fighting Joseph Parker. The problem between Errol Spence and Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford is if Errol Spence is able to unify those three belts, then are they going to fight one another? Then the pressure needs to be put on those guys to fight. As of right now, Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford is a nice to have. It's not a mandatory fight. It's not something, at least in the way that I view it, something that has to happen. So anyway, at this point in time. But if Errol Spence Jr. was to solidify all three belts and Terrence Crawford still had the WBO, or Terrence Crawford was able to solidify all the other three belts and Errol Spence had the IBF, then that fight needs to happen. Then it's not a matter of somebody holding up the sport, right? It's the ultimate goal again for me is I want to know who the best at welterweight is. And there's a guy named Keith Thurman and there's a guy named Sean Porter who are in that mix. And it is what it is. And with that, I'm out. Peace.